I didn't do it. That's what I've been telling myself for the past 40 years. I know it's true, I didn't do a thing. But someone did. Someone did something. And there's a lot that still doesn't make sense. Let me start from the beginning. It was the 1970s, and I had just come back from investigating a murder. It was pretty straightforward, a young girl, gruesomely murdered, her scalp removed. Nothing too shocking, at least not for me. I was a cop, been one for 10 years. Love my job, even if I've seen my fair share of odd things, especially with a girl named Hannah. But nothing like this, nothing personal. It all started with the knives. One day, I realized my knives kept disappearing. At first, I thought it was just some odd coincidence, or maybe I was losing my mind. But then it got worse. It was Thanksgiving, big meal, lots of preparation. I went to grab a knife to carve the turkey, and there were only 2 knives left. I don't know how it happened, but suddenly, I had no knives. At first, I wasn't too worried. But when I checked the drawer over and over, and they were still gone, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I went out, replaced the knives, only for them to disappear again. Every time, no matter what I did, they were gone, like they'd never existed at all. I figured maybe it was my daughter. She was 5 years old at the time, and I thought she might have taken them without knowing what she was doing. So, I asked her, "Cecil, have you seen the knives?" She looked at me, confused. "Knives? Daddy, what are knives?" I sighed, grabbed one of the few that were still left, and showed it to her. "The sharp things, honey. The ones with handles. Have you seen any of them?" "No, but the sharp man took one." Now, my heart stopped. I had never heard her mention the sharp man before. My daughter, with her innocent, wide eyes, was telling me something that sounded straight out of a horror movie. "The sharp man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, the sharp man?" "Yeah, he's funny. He wears black clothes and a weird mask, and he's covered in knives. He says he's friendly, but he can't show himself to you. He says you'll be mad. He says I have to keep him a secret." I stared at her, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think, but I knew this conversation was taking a dark turn. "Sweetheart, I can assure you, the sharp man isn't real." But she was insistent. "I don't have the knives. The sharp man does." That's when I knew I was in deep. This wasn't some imaginary friend, something was off. But I couldn't make sense of it. I left the room, trying to shake it off, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. I spent hours looking for the knives, but they were always gone. And just when I thought I might have imagined the whole thing, I heard her whispering. "The man is mad at you. He says you were somewhere you shouldn't have been." Now, this was starting to scare me. My daughter knew nothing about the investigation, nothing about the things I'd seen or done. How could she know these things? But I brushed it off as a coincidence. My daughter was just playing a game. Months passed. Knives kept vanishing, and I kept replacing them, until one day, about 7 months later, things went horribly wrong. I was just sitting in my room, watching TV when I heard a scream. At first, I thought it was just a TV show. But then I realized, it wasn't from the show. It was my daughter. My heart raced as I ran upstairs, knowing something was terribly wrong. What I found, it's hard to put into words. She had been stabbed. All of them, every last knife I had in the house. I don't know how it happened. I don't know who did it. But I do know one thing for sure, the sharp man was real. And he was angry. The sight of Emma, it still haunts me. Hundreds of knives, all stuck deep into her body, each one piercing her like a twisted display of anger and malice. Blood pooled out, staining the carpet, and her organs spilled out onto the floor in a grotesque mess. Her skin, her beautiful skin, was ripped away clean, leaving nothing but bone and exposed flesh. There wasn't a single inch of her left untouched. I looked around, frantic. It was as if something, or someone, was still in the room, lurking. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd see the sharp man standing there, holding my knives, ready to finish the job. But there was nothing. No one. Just my daughter, lying lifeless, surrounded by blood and knives. And then I saw it. Written on the walls, smeared in her blood, "Don't go after me. Don't return there." I didn't do it. I swear. I'm not crazy. I froze. What did it mean? Who was this message for? What was going on? The worst part? I was framed for her murder. The police said there was no DNA except mine and hers. My wife, she didn't believe me. She thought I did it. My whole world, my family, ruined. And to this day, the killer has never been found. But someone did this. Some sick bastard who is still out there, walking free. And I'll make them pay. One way or another. As a cop, you see a lot of strange things. And believe me, that wasn't even the worst of it. After what happened to Emma, I was transferred to a small town in Texas, Harmony Way. It's a tiny place, barely on the map, but there's something about it that draws in strange, eerie occurrences. The locals call it a shortcut, but they also call it cursed. There are stories about it, rumors that things happen there. Weird, unsettling things. Things I wasn't prepared for. Harmony Way is infamous among the townsfolk. It's central to all sorts of conspiracy theories, and the more time I spent there, the more I realized anything can happen there. And it does. My first encounter with the paranormal happened on my first day. I was patrolling with my partner, Chris, and I was nervous as hell. Chris was a friendly guy, but he had this way of being serious when it counted. We were cruising down Harmony Way when I saw a deer standing in the middle of the road. It didn't seem to care about the car speeding down toward it. I braced myself, expecting a crash. But then, something strange happened. The deer didn't move, it just stayed there, staring. The car, on the other hand, swerved at the last second and crashed into the side of the road. The driver was fine, but his car was totaled. I let the guy off with a fine, thinking it was just a typical accident. But Chris pulled me aside and said, "Charles, what the hell are you doing? You can't give a ticket here for speeding on Harmony Way. We don't do that." I was confused. But, he crashed. Into a deer. Chris just chuckled. That's the thing about Harmony Way. You get what you get here. If you're speeding, fine, but the road won't let you get away with it. It has its own rules. I didn't get it at first. There were no hard rules in this place, just strange, unspoken ones that no one really understood. And then Chris dropped a bomb on me. You'll learn. Things don't take sides here. It's like nature. Neutral. Doesn't care if you're a good guy or a bad guy. It just is. That should have been a clue. But at the time, I thought it was just some weird, old superstition. Until I saw more. And it got worse. Much worse. I'll tell you about the human bird next time. But trust me, it's just the beginning of the horrors that lurk in the shadows of Harmony Way. We had just finished our patrol, and it had been a long, uneventful day. The usual speeding tickets, a little cloud watching, nothing too out of the ordinary. But then, just as we were about to head back, something caught our eyes in the sky. A bird. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why is he talking about a bird? But let me tell you, this wasn't any regular bird. This one had a face, my mother's face. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My mother had passed away 10 years ago from Alzheimer's. And yet, there it was, clear as day, staring down at me from the sky. Her face, on a bird. It couldn't be real. It didn't make any sense. I looked over at Chris, confused, and he just nodded, as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. "You recognize that face, don't you?" he asked. I could barely respond. "How do you know that?" Why is there a bird with my mom's face?" Chris just shrugged, his expression unreadable. "It happens. Weird stuff. One day, it's Elvis's ghost, the next, you're getting transported to another dimension for a few seconds. That's Harmony Way for you. It doesn't make sense, but it's our job to make sure people stay safe while this place does whatever it does." The conversation moved on, but my mind was spinning. What the hell was going on in this place? We continued patrolling, but it wasn't until the next story that I truly began to understand the dangers of this place. It was my 4th time patrolling Harmony Way, and I was starting to get frustrated. Everything had been quiet, no demonic possessions, no crazy incidents. Just the usual. But as I turned to Chris, I couldn't help myself. "I've been wondering, why is nothing terrible happening? Where's the chaos? No paranormal stuff?" Chris looked at me and immediately got serious. "Charles, you don't want to be asking that right now. Not out here, on the street." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not? What's the deal?" Chris leaned in, lowering his voice. "Harmony Way, it has its own consciousness. It hears us. That's why we don't talk about this stuff while we're in it. We've done some experiments. You say too much, and it reacts. You learn too much about it, and it becomes more dangerous." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "So, what, you mean the place can hear us?" Chris nodded. "Yeah. And the more you know, the worse it gets." I didn't have time to think about it because, just then, something caught my eye. A figure, crossing the street. At first, I thought it was just some odd person, but as I looked closer, I saw the truth. This thing, this creature, was not human. It was huge. Easily 10 feet tall. Its eyes were coal black, darker than anything I had ever seen, like they didn't even reflect light. It was skeletal, its body unnaturally thin, and it was twitching, jerking, almost as if it wasn't fully connected to the world around it. And then it spoke. Its voice, distorted, as if someone had pieced together random audio clips to form words. "What are you doing here? Come with me. I have safety for you, Dad." My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. How did it know me? Why was it calling me Dad? Before I could react, the creature dropped to all fours, like some kind of animal, and hissed. "When I find you, I will kill you." Then it scurried off, disappearing into the darkness with unsettling speed. My heart was racing, my mind a blur. What the hell was that? I gasped, turning to Chris. Chris just looked at me, his face grim. "If you think that's the first time you've seen one of these doppelgangers, you're wrong. They're common. But that doesn't make them any less dangerous." I stared at him, still processing what had just happened. But, what did it mean? Safety? Kill me? Chris packed up his stuff quickly, his voice low. "Don't let them touch you, Charles. If they do, you'll turn into a pile of boils. Flesh will rot off. And when you die, you won't just die. You'll be put into the foundations. And trust me, you don't want to be in the foundations." I didn't understand, not fully. But I knew one thing for sure, Harmony Way was no ordinary place. And whatever it was, it wasn't done with me yet. The horrors of Harmony Way were just beginning. The return of the deer, it sounds like something out of a bad horror story, but trust me, after everything I had been through in Harmony Way, I knew this was no coincidence. Chris and I were back on patrol when it happened. We were cruising down the road when I noticed it, a deer. The same deer I'd seen when I first started patrolling Harmony Way. It was just standing there, in the same spot where I had seen it all those weeks ago. But something was different this time. Its eyes. The deer's eyes were wrong. They were completely black, like the same coal-black eyes I had seen on that creature during the doppelganger encounter. It was as if the deer wasn't even alive, just a shell with that terrible, haunting stare. "Chris," I whispered, pointing to the deer. "Look at its eyes." Chris looked over, his expression unreadable. "It's back." I didn't understand what he meant at first. But before I could ask, the deer suddenly moved, lurching forward with unnatural speed. It was almost as if it was coming for us, and the closer it got, the more I could feel the air grow colder, heavier. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could tell Chris was feeling it too. He slammed on the brakes, but the deer didn't stop. It kept coming, moving with an almost mechanical precision. The strange black eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I thought I could hear it whispering, faint, distorted words that seemed to come from deep inside my skull. "You can't escape, not here." Chris swore under his breath, swerving the car to the side, but the deer was right on us. It was like the road itself was trying to trap us. In a panic, I shouted, "What the hell is happening?" But Chris was already shouting back. "It's the road. Harmony Way does this to people. The deer, it's a warning. Get out of the car, Charles." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my gear and bolted out of the car, but not before catching one last glimpse of the deer. It was standing in the middle of the road, its black eyes still locked onto me, and then, it was gone. Just like that. Chris and I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty road where the deer had been. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a warning. It was something more. A message. The deer wasn't the only thing that haunted Harmony Way. There was something deeper, something darker. But what could it all mean? "Let's get back to the foundation," Chris muttered, clearly shaken, and without another word, we headed off. I couldn't help but feel like Harmony Way was pushing us deeper into its grip, pulling us into something much worse than we could have ever imagined. As we left, the road behind us seemed to stretch on forever. No matter how far we went, no matter how much we tried to outrun the horrors, they were always there, just waiting for us to come back. The pain in my stomach was unbearable, but there was something deeper that scared me more than the physical injury, the memory of the creature, the blur of gray, the teeth, and those crawling legs. I couldn't shake the image of it. Whatever it was, it had been fast, too fast to escape, and the sensation of being so close to death still lingered. Chris, looking over me, shook his head. "You really shouldn't have gone after that kid," he said, his voice carrying a weight of regret. "Told you it wasn't worth it." Sheila stood beside him, her eyes wide with concern, but there was something else in her gaze. I could see that she wasn't just worried about my well-being, there was something darker beneath the surface. As she stroked my cheek, I felt an odd chill, not from the coldness of the room, but from something else. Something unsettling. "I'm glad you're awake," Sheila said softly, her voice almost too gentle, like she was trying to soothe me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her presence was somehow more sinister than it appeared. I tried to sit up, but my body protested with a sharp pain, forcing me to lie back down. "What was that thing?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Chris sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We don't know for sure," he admitted. "But that thing you encountered? It's not like any creature we've come across before. It's an anomaly, something we've been tracking for years. We call it the gray blur, and it's responsible for the disappearances of all those kids. But no one's been able to stop it." I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. "Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you tell me about it before?" "Because you wouldn't have believed us," Chris replied. "You would have thought it was just another freak accident, another urban legend, but it's real. And the longer you stay in Harmony Way, the more you realize how dangerous it really is. That kid you saw? It wasn't human. It was a lure, a trap." My heart raced as I thought back to the kid, the way it had spoken, wrong, distorted, like it was trying to deceive us. "So, all the missing kids, they're dead?" Chris nodded grimly. "Some of them are. Others, well, they become part of whatever that thing is. It's a hunting ground for creatures like it, and if you get too close, you're as good as gone. Don't try to play the hero, Charles. The more you know about Harmony Way, the more it'll get to you. I looked at Sheila, who was still standing there, her fingers lingering on my cheek. And you? I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Are you here to help or something else? Her smile was cold, almost too perfect. I'm here to make sure you survive long enough to understand what you're really dealing with, she said, her voice too sweet, too soft. You'll see, Charles. In time, you'll learn that we're all just players in a game we can't escape. As she turned and walked out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread growing inside me. I had seen so much in the time I'd been in Harmony Way, but the worst, I knew, was still yet to come. Chris stood up, giving me one last look before heading toward the door. Take it easy for now. You've got a long road ahead of you. As he left, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions, doubts, and fears. What was Harmony Way? Why was I here? And how much longer could I survive before everything I had seen and experienced consumed me? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was for sure, Harmony Way wasn't a place you could just leave behind. It was a part of me now, and there was no escaping that. Not anymore. Sheila's response made me pause, her words lingering in the air. A Harmony spelunker? I'd heard of people like that, those who were obsessed with unraveling the secrets of Harmony Way, but I never thought Sheila would have any connection to it. Your dad was one of them? I asked, a little stunned. She nodded, her expression turning somber. Yeah. He was, but he got lost. A lot of people do. It's dangerous, and people like my dad, they go deeper into the mysteries of this place than anyone should. He found things no one was supposed to know. But he disappeared one day, and I've been trying to figure it all out ever since. Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was lost in the memory of her father. I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent. I knew enough about Harmony Way to understand that once you were in it, there was no getting out. Whatever dark secrets it held, they consumed people, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Sheila seemed like one of the few who knew just how far it went. We picked out our lab coats at the store, and after a few more minutes of exchanging information, we headed toward the facility. It was strange, the way we were both so eager to learn more, yet terrified of what we might find. The closer we got to the facility, the more anxious I felt. We parked in a small, hidden lot a few blocks away, out of sight from the main building. As we approached, I noticed the heavy security, guards, cameras, and a general sense of surveillance that made everything feel even more oppressive. Sheila glanced at me, her face expressionless. If we get caught, we'll both be in a lot of trouble. You need to stay close to me, and don't say anything unless I say so. Got it? I nodded, swallowing hard. Got it. We walked toward the side entrance, which was rarely used, but seemed to be the only way in without attracting attention. Sheila was leading the way, and I followed closely behind, feeling the weight of the secret we were about to uncover. Once inside, the air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of chemicals. The walls were white, too white, and the whole building felt suffocating. I kept my head down, trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. There were security doors, hallways, and rooms that looked like they went on forever. It didn't take long before Sheila stopped in front of a metal door with a keypad. This is it, she whispered, her hand resting on the door. We're about to find out what the Foundation is really hiding. My breath caught in my throat as she typed in a series of numbers. The door clicked open, and we stepped inside. The room was darker than the others, lit only by the dim glow of fluorescent lights. There were rows of metal shelves, some of them containing strange objects, artifacts, files, and what looked like equipment meant for research I couldn't even begin to understand. We moved quietly through the room, trying to avoid being seen. But the farther we went, the more unsettling it became. It wasn't just the strange objects or the mysterious papers, it was the sense that something was watching us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that whatever the Foundation was hiding, it knew we were there. As we continued our search, I noticed a large, locked file cabinet in the back corner of the room. Sheila hesitated for a moment, then approached it. "This is what we're here for," she said softly. She pulled out a small device from her pocket and used it to unlock the cabinet. Inside, there were stacks of papers, each one more cryptic than the last. I leaned over her shoulder, trying to make sense of the words, but they were too technical, too complex. It was like reading a foreign language. "What is all this?" I whispered. Sheila frowned as she flipped through the pages. "This is it. The heart of the Foundation. This is what they're doing here. These aren't just anomalies they're studying, they're experimenting on them, trying to control them. And there's more." I looked over at her, my stomach twisting with dread. "What do you mean, more?" She turned to me, her face pale. There are subjects in here. People who've been turned into anomalies. They're trying to manipulate the anomalies to create soldiers, controllable, programmable beings." I felt my stomach drop. This isn't just a research facility. This is a weapon lab. Sheila nodded grimly. "Exactly. And it's been going on for years. They've been using Harmony Way as a testing ground." I stepped back, trying to process the magnitude of what we were learning. Everything I'd experienced in Harmony Way, the monsters, the disappearances, the strange events, it was all part of a larger, more terrifying plan. Before I could say anything else, a loud noise echoed through the hall. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, and someone was coming our way. Sheila grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back of the room, urging me to be quiet. We ducked behind a row of shelves, holding our breath as the footsteps drew closer. I could hear the murmur of voices, then the creak of a door opening. I felt a cold sweat forming on my skin as I waited, terrified that we were about to be caught. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps faded away. Sheila let out a quiet sigh of relief. "We need to get out of here, now." I nodded quickly, and we backed away from the cabinet, careful to avoid making any noise. Our hearts were pounding in our chests as we made our way back to the door. But as we reached the entrance, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. A figure, tall and thin, standing perfectly still, watching us. Before I could react, Sheila grabbed my arm and pulled me out the door. "We're not alone," she whispered urgently. "Let's go." We ran through the halls, the fear of being caught driving us faster. I couldn't help but feel that whatever we had uncovered in that room, whatever the Foundation was hiding, was only the tip of the iceberg. And I had a feeling that if we didn't get out now, we might never leave at all. We stood there, frozen, as the elevator doors slowly closed behind us. I couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment we were interrogating the masked subject, trying to understand what was going on, and the next, we were caught in a firefight with armed guards. But someone unknown, had come to our aid, and just as quickly as they appeared, they disappeared. It was as if they never existed at all. The officer who had saved us whispered from the shadows, "You're welcome." His words lingered in the air, but there was no time to process them. We had to keep moving. The elevator shot upwards with a jolt, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I looked at Sheila, who seemed calm, even though I could see the tension in her eyes. Her father's connection to this place, the truth about what was really going on in this facility, everything was starting to unravel. But I could feel the danger closing in. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sheila didn't immediately respond. Instead, she looked down at the key card in her hand, which still glowed faintly in the low light of the elevator. "I don't know. I didn't think we had anyone on our side here. But it looks like someone's been keeping an eye on us." I frowned. "Why help us? We're just two people snooping around." "Maybe they think it's time someone knew the truth," she said quietly. "Maybe they want us to uncover it, so it can't stay hidden anymore." The elevator reached the top floor with a soft chime, and the doors slid open to reveal a long hallway lined with rooms. The atmosphere was oppressive, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something here, something wrong. Something waiting for us. We stepped out cautiously, moving as quietly as possible. Sheila led the way, her eyes darting from side to side, looking for any sign of movement. I stayed close, my hand resting on the concealed gun at my side, just in case. "This place," I whispered. "It's not like anything I've ever seen before." Sheila nodded grimly. "The Foundation does things here that no one should ever know about. My father, he was part of it. But I don't think he knew just how deep it went. No one does. Not until it's too late." We reached the end of the hallway and paused in front of a reinforced door. The sign above read "Restricted Area." My heart pounded in my chest. Whatever was behind that door, I knew it was the key to everything. The answers we'd been searching for. Sheila pulled out a small device, almost like a scanner, and swiped it across the keypad beside the door. It beeped, then flashed green. The door clicked open, and we stepped inside. The room was cold, sterile, and vast. It looked like some kind of research lab, with rows of tanks filled with strange fluids. Each tank contained something that didn't look human. I turned away, my stomach twisting in disgust. "This is it," Sheila said, her voice low but firm. "This is what they've been hiding. My father didn't disappear because of some anomaly. He was part of this." I stepped closer, trying to get a better look. "What is this place? What are they doing here?" Sheila's face hardened as she turned to me. "This is where they experiment on people, subjects, turn them into anomalies. They use them, control them. And when they're done, they either discard them, or worse, they turn them into something else. Something dangerous." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had known there was something off about the Foundation, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. As I took another step into the room, a low, mechanical hum filled the air. The tanks began to glow, their contents shifting. Someone, was moving inside one of the tanks. And then, a voice broke through the silence, a voice that chilled me to the bone. "Welcome to the Foundation, Charles." I turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, a tall man dressed in a lab coat. His eyes glowed with a strange, unnatural light. "We've been expecting you." The weight of Chris's words sank into me like a heavy stone. We weren't just here to observe or protect, we were part of something much darker. We were just pawns in the Foundation's cruel game, no better than the anomalies or the civilians caught in its grasp. Chris wiped away the tear that had formed in his eye, his gaze hardened with a mix of anger and resignation. "You see, Charles, they don't care about any of us. They use us, manipulate us, and when they're done, they toss us aside. They've done it to people like Sheila's dad, to us, and even to the people who think they're safe. They don't even bother to cover their tracks. They just keep experimenting, like we're all part of some sick lab test." I felt a cold shiver run through me. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of everything. It was all connected, every twisted thing that had happened, every horror we'd witnessed, it was all a part of the same horrific experiment. The Foundation wasn't just studying anomalies, they were creating them, controlling them, and using them as tools in their larger scheme. As we walked back through the area, the sky seemed darker, the air heavier. I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. Like the walls were closing in, and every step we took brought us closer to something we couldn't escape. It was a suffocating, inescapable feeling. "Chris," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what do we do now? We can't just keep pretending everything is fine. We know too much." Chris looked at me, his face grim. "We keep moving. We keep fighting. But we do it smart. We know now that we're not just fighting for our own survival. We're fighting for everyone else who's caught up in this mess. Sheila's dad, the civilians who vanish without a trace. They all deserve to know the truth. And if we're lucky, we'll be the ones to bring it to them." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too deep in. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. The Foundation had to be stopped, and if we were the ones who had to do it, then so be it. As we continued to walk, the ground beneath us seemed to tremble, a low, eerie hum echoing in the distance. I glanced at Chris, his expression unreadable, but I could tell that he, too, felt the weight of what was to come. We weren't just running from the Foundation anymore. We were running toward it, toward the truth. And no matter what we faced, we couldn't stop now. The tension in the air was thick, my pulse quickening as the doppelganger's words sank in. It was as if the entire world around us had shifted, the warning echoing in my mind like a drumbeat. The director knew everything. Our plans, our investigations, our attempt to uncover the twisted rituals that the Foundation conducted. And worse, he knew how to break us, to use our loved ones against us. Chris didn't flinch, but I could tell he was processing the weight of what the doppelganger had just revealed. The man we were fighting against wasn't just some faceless entity pulling strings from the shadows. No, this director was a force of pure control, with the power to crush anyone who stood in his way. He's planning to break us, I muttered under my breath, the words barely leaving my lips. To kill everyone we care about, then make us watch, make us suffer. Chris turned to face me, his expression colder than I'd ever seen it. We can't let him. We have to expose him. And we can't do it alone. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The stakes had never been higher. Our investigation, our fight against the Foundation, was no longer just about finding the truth. It was about survival. About protecting the people we cared about. And about stopping a monster who was manipulating lives on a scale we hadn't even fully understood. We both knew that everything had changed. The director was no longer a distant figure in the background. He was a looming threat, ready to destroy us if we didn't act fast. But there was one thing I was certain of, this time, we weren't going to be the ones broken. We need a plan, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around us. Chris nodded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. We've been playing defense long enough. It's time we go on the offensive. We'll need to gather allies, expose their rituals, and show the world what they're truly capable of. How do we get to the director? I asked, already knowing that would be the hardest part. One step at a time, Chris replied. We start by gathering information, then we bring it to the people who can help us. And we'll make sure the Foundation knows they can't keep doing this to innocent people. They'll be exposed for what they really are. I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. We had no idea how deep the Foundation's reach went, or how many allies they had within powerful circles. But one thing was clear, the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping a nightmare that had been allowed to grow unchecked for far too long. As the doppelganger faded from sight, his words echoing in our minds, Chris and I set off on our path. There was no turning back now. The director was coming for us, and we had to be ready. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just fighting for the truth, I was fighting for the future. And I wasn't going to let the Foundation win. The fear I felt was suffocating as I ran from the creature, my heart pounding in my chest. The mimic, that twisted version of my daughter, taunted me with its smile, its eyes gleaming with malice. It was a trap, I knew that deep down, but a part of me couldn't help but wonder, could there still be a trace of Cecil within it? Or had I lost her forever to the horrors of this place? Andrew, reckless as ever, had followed me, but he was just as shaken as I was. We both knew that we were no longer dealing with simple anomalies. These things were far beyond that, creatures of pure terror that fed off our fear, our grief, our most vulnerable emotions. Keep moving! I shouted, pushing Andrew forward as the beast loomed behind us. It was relentless, its jagged, grotesque form shifting and contorting as it stalked us. We had no chance against it. Our bullets were useless, just like every other weapon we'd tried in this cursed place. We ran through the streets, the beast hot on our heels. I could hear its guttural growls behind us, the heavy steps that seemed to echo in my skull. It wasn't just hunting us, it was toying with us, drawing out the fear and the despair until we were nothing but shells of our former selves. I could see the twisted images of Cecil and my wife flash before my eyes, their faces distorted by grief and horror. "Where are we going?" Andrew yelled, his voice strained. "I don't know," I shouted back, my mind racing. We had to escape. There was no time to think, no time for anything but survival. The only thing I could focus on was getting away from the thing chasing us, away from the nightmare that had already cost me so much. But as we turned a corner, I realized we weren't alone. Figures moved in the shadows, watching us with silent eyes. Were they other officers, or just more of the Foundation's twisted experiments? I grabbed Andrew by the arm, pulling him into an alleyway. We couldn't afford to be seen. We couldn't afford to make another mistake. "Stay quiet," I whispered, my breath shallow. "We need to figure out a plan. We can't keep running. Not like this." We huddled together, listening as the beast's growls faded into the distance. For a brief moment, we were safe. But I knew it wouldn't last. The Foundation was always watching. Always waiting. And we were just pawns in their game. The realization hit me hard. No matter how much we fought, no matter how many lives we tried to save, the Foundation would never stop. It was too powerful, too vast. And we were just two men caught in its web, desperately trying to survive. I looked at Andrew, seeing the fear in his eyes. It was the same fear I'd felt ever since I stepped into this twisted world, the fear of losing everything, of becoming just another casualty in the Foundation's never-ending experiments. "We have to stop this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to expose them. Somehow, we have to end this nightmare." Andrew nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Could we really take on the Foundation? Could we even survive long enough to do anything about it? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: we couldn't give up. Not now. Not when so many lives depended on us. As we prepared to move again, I felt a new sense of determination rise within me. No matter how deep this darkness went, no matter how many times we were thrown into the depths of despair, we couldn't let them win. We had to find a way to break free. The day I almost got him, the sharp man, the monster that had haunted me for years, it was meant to be the turning point. I thought it would bring me closure. Instead, it just reminded me of all that I had lost. It started off like any other day, but it ended with another failure, another piece of my soul chipped away. Cecil. Her death was what had triggered everything. I was prepared, or so I thought. I had been watching the room, waiting for the right moment. When I entered, I was sure I could protect her. But it wasn't meant to be. The room was empty, no sign of the monster. Just me and Cecil, her innocent eyes looking up at me in confusion. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I told her I was trying to protect her, but it didn't matter. The sharp man had already marked his territory. Just when I thought I had a moment to breathe, it happened. I heard it, the scream. I turned around just in time to see the blur, the figure darting through the window. The crash echoed in my mind as I rushed forward, but it was too late. Cecil was gone. I leapt out the window after the figure, gun drawn, desperate to stop it. But it vanished, like smoke in the wind, leaving only a trace of its presence in the ground where it had stood. "Andrew!" I screamed into the walkie-talkie, my voice filled with panic. "It's him. He's covered in spikes, just like before. He's here. He got her." I raced to my car, the urgency in my movements raw, frantic. I had to stop him. I had to. But when I reached the spot, the sharp man was gone. I saw him, just a silhouette in the distance, taunting me, as if daring me to come closer. I pulled my gun and fired. The shots echoed, but they didn't hit. He stood there, unmoving, like he was mocking me, watching me struggle. And then, just as fast as he had appeared, he was gone. I ran after him, my heart in my throat, but he was always one step ahead. He climbed a cliff, faster than I could react, and when I tried to follow, my rope was cut. The knife came out of the rock wall, severing my chance at reaching him. I stood there, panting, heartbroken. Andrew came up beside me, his face grim. "We'll get him, sir," he said, but his words didn't bring me comfort. I could hear the doubt in his voice. How many more times would I fail? How many more times would I lose before I could finally stop this nightmare? I looked at him and smiled, though the pain in my chest was unbearable. "It's not too late," I muttered, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The Foundation had already stolen so much from me, Cecil, my peace of mind, my sanity. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. Even as the weight of the world seemed to crush me, I couldn't let go. I had to keep fighting, for Cecil, for Chris, for everything I had lost. Because if I didn't, then everything they had done to us would be for nothing. And I refused to let that happen. But the sharp man was still out there. And no matter how hard I tried, he always seemed to be one step ahead. Story 21, The Clown. Andrew, Sugandha, and I were patrolling Harmony Way when we saw a man in makeup walking towards us. He was wearing a clown costume, with exaggerated features and a wide grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He waved at us silently, as if he was expecting something. I glanced at Andrew, then back at the clown. "Sorry, man, we don't have any cash today," I said, trying to dismiss the awkwardness of the situation. It was true, we didn't have any money on us, and we weren't in the mood for any antics. But as we walked past him, something strange happened. The clown didn't move at first, but then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. And then, just as quickly, he appeared in the middle of a nearby warehouse. My heart skipped a beat, and Andrew muttered under his breath. "Dude, we're broke," he said, trying to shrug off the weirdness of it all. Suddenly, the clown was standing in front of us again, only this time, he held out his hand. Without thinking, I shook it, but as soon as I did, something horrifying happened. My arm was yanked off, as if it had been made of Legos. There wasn't any blood, just the sickening feeling of something unnatural. The clown shook his head slowly, wagging his pointed finger in disapproval. Without a word, he placed my arm on a hook. I looked around, and only then did I realize that there were thousands of arms hanging from hooks, each one waving at me, as if mocking my horror. I almost vomited on the spot, but before I could process what was happening, I blinked again, and we were back on the street. My arm was still missing, and blood poured from the stump, causing intense pain. Andrew helped me get to the hospital, where I would get stitched up, but I still didn't have a left arm. I was left with the memory of the clown and the sense that some things could not be explained. Story 22, One Last Try. 10 years had passed since my career as a police officer, and by now, Andrew had settled into the woods, training a new apprentice. He had been away for some time, but we reunited when I received word that the sharp man was still active. This time, I was determined to stop him before he could get to my grandmother. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came for her. I just wasn't sure when. One day, Andrew and I were together, walking through the hospital, keeping our eyes peeled for anything unusual. We had been hunting the sharp man for years, and this time, I thought we might finally catch him. As we walked through the hallway, I saw a shadow dart across the walls. My hand instinctively went to my gun, and I aimed it, but Andrew quickly stopped me. "Dude, what are you doing?" he asked, pulling my arm down. "You're gonna get us kicked out." But as we kept moving, I saw the shadow again, this time more clearly, a tall figure with silver knives all over its body. It moved quickly, darting in front of an elderly woman. I saw the deep gash across her heart, and then the figure disappeared into thin air. The sharp man. We knew we had to act fast. We ran toward the police car, with the sharp man following us, his knives rising from the ground as he attacked. The road was flooded with water, the floodwaters of Harmony Way overtaking everything. We thought we had trapped him when we turned the car so that he would charge into the deep blue ocean, but he jumped out of the water with terrifying speed, unfazed by the flood. We kept driving, but the sharp man didn't stop. He kept coming, relentless. Tires popped, and our gas tank emptied, leaving us stranded. The sharp man closed in, and for a moment, I thought this was it, this was where I would finally die. But then I saw it, his face. Underneath the knives, I saw the face of my old partner, Chris. His eyes were lifeless, hollow, and I felt a surge of pain. I raised my gun, aiming for the creature's head, but it charged at me, knocking me to the ground. Andrew tried to help, but the thing was too powerful. Just when it looked like it would end me, I heard a familiar voice. "Get up. You still have a chance." It was Chris's voice, but I knew it wasn't really him. I climbed to my feet, rifle in hand, with only 3 rounds left. I fired once, missed. I fired again, blocked. My last shot hit, but it didn't stop the creature. It rattled, shattered, and then chaos erupted. The knives dropped like rain, thousands of them filling the ground around us. The creature was broken, but it wasn't over. By the time the foundation arrived, one of the knives had already struck me. The sharp man was gone, but the terror he left behind was real. Since that day, I've seen shadows in the corners of my vision. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if he's still out there, watching me. But I try to live my life. Sheila and I adopted a child named Jack, and he's off to college now. But the sharp man is still in my memories, lurking in the darkest corners of my mind. As for me, I'm not sure what comes next. I think about one more trip to Harmony Way, but after everything I've been through, I'm not sure I'm ready to face what's still waiting for me. But if I do, it might be the final chapter in this long nightmare. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you ever find yourself in Harmony Way, be careful. You never know who or what is watching.